Hello, this is Linda Nielsen joining you about my first trip dining out, reducing the fear with five tips. I hope you can all hear me. If someone could just send a comment making sure that I am actually live, that would be great. This is the second live video that I'm doing today. The first one was about my journey and neurological symptoms. So, a little about myself. I've had celiac disease for 36 years, and being diagnosed in the early 80s was indeed a challenge because not much was known about celiac disease at that point in time. And so it was a fairly large challenge going out into restaurants and explaining that you can't have gluten in your food. So it was fairly hit and miss, I must say. In about 1995, I took a job with a software company, and that involved traveling around North America and down to Australia and New Zealand. And I was gone about 300 of the 365 days a month. So that meant I was eating out an awful lot. So these are my 5 tips with regards to eating out, especially for people who are new to being diagnosed with celiac disease or other gluten disorders. And I hope you're able to be helped with these tips. So the first one is go to recommended restaurant from your local Celiac Association chapter. Right now, there are many apps out there, such as Yelp and Find Me Gluten Free, that I would give an average rating on recommending a gluten-free or a restaurant that serves gluten-free. The challenge with these apps, especially Yelp, is that restaurants can self-recommend themselves, so their waiters or waitresses or the owner of the restaurant can say that they do gluten-free, but they don't really have the standards that are needed to serve a person with celiac disease a safe meal without cross-contamination. So I would definitely go with a personal recommendation. Either get on a Facebook site for the main Celiac Association site or one of the chapters, or I would phone the local association and get some restaurants that they recommend. That way you're able to ask some questions such as how was your meal? What meals do you recommend? Do they have a gluten-free menu? That type of thing. The second tip is to phone the restaurant yourself. And when you phone the restaurant, just a sec, my pages are blowing away here because I'm outside of my apartment because it's too dark inside and I look like a ghost, is to phone the restaurant in advance to indicate you're coming to dine, and you want to check they can accommodate someone who eats gluten-free due to medical reasons. Now, I tend to stay away from the words gluten-free diet these days because it's getting to be a buzzword. And if they say, yes, we do gluten-friendly, that is a warning signal to me because I don't like the words gluten-friendly. That doesn't necessarily mean gluten-free. I would then ask them some clarifying questions, such as, do you have a gluten-free menu? What do you mean by gluten-friendly? Do you have a separate prep area for the gluten-free meals that you create? Those are just a couple of the questions. You need to feel confident yourself by booking a reservation or by calling the restaurant with regards to being able to dine there. So if you decide to go to this restaurant, at the restaurant, I always identify myself when I come into the restaurant to the hostess. So I say something to the fact as party of two, one person who needs a gluten-free meal. So the hostess then knows they have a person dining with them who needs some type of special accommodation in terms of the food service. That allows the hostess, one, to get a gluten-free menu if they have one of those, and two, to pass that along to the server. Then at the table, once seated, once the server shows up, I say the same thing to the server. I identify myself as a person who requires a gluten-free meal, and if there's not a gluten-free menu, I then say, what does the server recommend that can be made gluten-free? If the server starts to hum and haw at that point in time, that's a challenge. Because keep in mind, you've already phoned the restaurant and decided to come to this restaurant. So I immediately ask for either the manager or the chef. And I ask the same question of the manager or the chef. So if you still do not feel comfortable once you've talked to the manager or the chef, at that point in time, I get up, I pay for whatever we have ordered. Generally, for me, it's a soft drink or coffee or tea, and I leave the restaurant. But generally, because you've done your homework in advance, you get the chef, and he will go over what you can eat, and they will be able to prepare a meal for you. So on that note, it was pretty hard for me in the 1995 to 2000 area traveling and eating gluten-free. But since about 2000, it's getting easier and easier these days to find a restaurant who either has a gluten-free menu or has some awareness in the kitchen of what needs to be done for a person who's dining gluten-free. Obviously, there's definitely the restaurants still that say, oh, yeah, we can do gluten free and have no idea that gluten means wheat and not glucose. You still will run into those. But more and more restaurants, if you do your research in advance, will be able to serve you. So, my fourth point is that more and more restaurants are handling gluten free requests just fine these days, and often they send their chef or sous chef out to talk to the diner. And I always use that as an opportunity to further discuss. It depends on who I'm dining with, but if it's with family, I use that as a further point to cover cross-contamination and what kind of meals that they can provide. Because I've been gluten-free for so long, I generally have fairly plain meals because I'm not used to these high-end meals. But unfortunately, speaking of high-end, most of the restaurants that do gluten-free are fairly high-end restaurants. And then the last tip, number 5, is that you have to be very careful when dining at these restaurants that you set a good example for future people dining with celiac disease. I find that there's an old adage that with honey you're going to get more than with vinegar, and I have found that to be out dining to be true because I've been in a restaurant where another celiac has tried to dine and they have not treated them very well, where I have done just fine getting my meal and I'm sitting there eating my meal where another person is not being very successful. Please and thank you very much once you leave, and leaving a good tip for the extra service that you receive is always pleasing to the restaurant and makes them feel better about serving people who do have dietary challenges. So those are my 5 tips for dining out for the first time. And dining out for the first time and how to do it by reducing your fear. So just to review them, they are to go to a recommended restaurant from either a celiac association, the celiac Facebook pages that people can recommend them, or if you know another person with celiac disease. Two is to phone the restaurant in advance so that you are comfortable that they do understand what is needed. Three is identifying yourself at the restaurant to the hostess and the server, and talking to the chef or the manager if you don't get satisfaction out of the server. And then four is more and more restaurants are actually serving gluten-free actually fairly safely these days. So it's not as hard as it used to be. And number five is just relax, have fun, and remember you're going to catch more thank yous with honey than with vinegar. And remember, vinegar is gluten-free. So I want to thank you for attending this session. It's been put on by Shar Foods, and if you need any more help, you can find a lot of information with regards to dining out or medical information on the celiac.ca website. Does anyone have any questions? Hi, Elizabeth. Hi, Melissa. Any more questions? Well, I think I will close down this session then from the outdoors of beautiful Vancouver, BC. And I will see you guys at 5 o'clock for another session on, I can't remember what my next session's on. Gosh, it just skipped my mind. Anyway, I will see you guys at 5 o'clock. Have a good day. Bye-bye.